Yeah, I think all the metrics that we would look at, and we have done a fair bit of research on this in the university over the years. Our modelling would put Manchester United somewhere in the kind of £2 to £3 billion valuation. I appreciate that if you're going to sell that club, it would be a higher price, and that's where the kind of guesswork comes in, because how do you arrive at that figure, and the owners would have a figure that they would want. I get the feeling that the Glazers would always want to sell at a much higher price than that anyway. We've seen figures talked around in the past around getting United to a valuation of around 7 billion to 10 billion. That's a long way off, and might be, very much an overstretch in terms of that actual value given where we're at the minute. But they're probably worth somewhere in the region of, £2 to £3 billion if we look at it objectively. They would sell for much more than that. But I think, again, you're absolutely right. That is also dependent on sporting performance, and the risk for Manchester United over the last few years is that they've dropped off from winning Premier League titles that they were so used to winning. They've not qualified for the Champions League, which gets you around £100 million in extra revenue every year. So the sporting performance risk in English football is far greater than in American sports, which of course their owners come from. So there's a lot going on there, but I think I think it's unlikely the Glazers will sell fully at this point. There might be an exit point in time, but they'll have their sights set on a valuation, and that's about how you get that club there or thereabouts. But it's always a little bit subjective with football club valuations. Yeah, absolutely. We get into those arguments, don't we? And again, if you look at Chelsea, our valuations would have them at around, or most valuations actually would say 1.5 to 2 billion was a more realistic value of that club. But it was 4.25 billion in the end, wasn't it? And some of that was tied up in investment over the long term. So that 1.7 billion of that was linked to investment in the long term. But yeah, you're right. It does create a situation whereby right now that's a price to aim for. So if Chelsea is 4.2 billion, what are Manchester United worth in relation to Chelsea? And certainly a lot of people would argue that it should be higher. Granted, Chelsea's on-pitch performance has been better than United's over the last recent seasons, but a lot of people would argue that United should be a higher valuation. So if you are looking to sell the whole thing, and I don't think we're there yet with the Glazers, I really don't think that's the case. But if you are looking to sell the whole entity, then where do you see yourself against that most recent price, which was 4 and a bit billion? Yeah, so you have to cover a few things off. You have to look at how much the owners are prepared to sell, whether it's a minority versus a majority stake. I think we're firmly in the minority part at the minute. Those kind of stakes can go through a lot quicker than a full takeover, because you're dealing with a small element of the business, 5-10% or whatever it is, rather than the whole thing. So minority stakes would always kind of process a little bit quicker. There'd still be some negotiations, but generally speaking, they would get through a little bit quicker. If you're looking at selling the whole business, then those things take more time, because there's more components to consider. And obviously, you've got other moving parts in the mix there of the fact that, United are listed on the New York Stock Exchange. So you've got shareholders, you've got the other investments that the Glazers have got, and, and the books and things like that as well. So there's a lot of moving parts to that. So I genuinely think at the minute we're in the minority sale stake, if anything at all, rather than a full takeover. I think if we look at the Premier League as a league itself, and again look at the money coming in, so the total broadcasting deal for the Premier League, when you consider domestic and international rights, is going to now tip over £10 billion across 3 years, and they've recently rolled that through as well from 2019 to 2022 to extend that to 2025. So again, on a much smaller scale than in some American sports, but those clubs in that league know that they've got that broadcasting money, and as long as they stay in that league, you are able to spend against that broadcasting money, which is kind of the play that Forest are making. You have to compete on the pitch as well, so you have to get involved in that transfer market whether you like it or not. But we see English clubs spend a lot more money than other clubs in Europe year on year, purely because for the most part it's the money coming into the league. And of course everybody then knows that, so selling clubs know that in Europe and around the world, agents know that. Everybody knows nowadays what Premier League clubs earn. So you kind of see a lot of the activity in England, where in other leagues it looks a little bit quieter. So I think it's just a case of when we see these figures, yes, they are, very what we would perceive to be very high figures for transfer fees, and we can start to benchmark players and what we think so and so is worth in relation to so and so. But on a base level, most of the clubs in the Premier League can afford those type of transfers, providing that then turns into good enough on pitch performance to stay in the league.